All right, hello everyone. Today is August 25th, 2022, and this is the Cluster API Provider Azure Office Hours. If you're joining us for the first time, please know that we are following the CNCF Code of Conduct. So if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand and please try to be respectful with everyone else. If you don't have access to the document, you can get access for editing by joining the SIG Cluster Lifecycle mailing list. And I just want to note that we have changed the meeting time. This is the first time we're doing this at this new time. We're now going to have this office hours every week instead of bi-weekly, and it's going to be every Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So I hope you can join us. And if you have any topics, you can add them to the open discussion right here. And if you can, please add your name to the attendee list so that we can keep track of who's attending these, and it will also help us know if the new time is working for people. All right, with that, we usually start by giving a chance to anyone who is new to the meeting to kind of introduce themselves and tell us a bit about why they're here. So if anyone here hasn't been to this meeting before and wants to say hi, now would be a good time. Please go ahead and unmute and tell us a bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Simon Reich. I recently joined the company using CAPC. So I decided to attend and check on the status of the project. So yeah, my buddy Zane here is on the call as well. So I work with him. Maybe
awesome, welcome.
Yeah.
All right, anyone else? I think everyone else is a familiar face. Cool. All right, so let's see. Did I dive right into discussion? Jack has 2 items today. Go for it, Jack.
Okay, cool. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the graduation of Azure Managed Cluster, which is the CAPC jargon for running AKS clusters on CAPC and Cluster API. We want to graduate that to V1, and so I'm proposing that the best way we do this is kind of using the formal Kubernetes style proposal medium, which usually manifests first as a Google Doc and then as a PR, but I think there are advantages to doing this in the PR from the beginning to sort of make sure this is even more public, because I think this is going to touch a lot of folks. And also would love to fast track this and get people's ideas as soon as possible so that we can make sure that we do this in a timely way. So I guess it's probably not, I'm happy to go through and read the current status of things. This is basically a brain dump from me after several weeks and months of thinking about this, but it's definitely not complete. What I wanted to do in this office hours is just sort of announce this and then turn the PR from a draft into a real PR, and then just start soliciting opinions from the community. So the sort of current state of this and the criteria that I've laid out doesn't have to be indicative of where this goes. I'm just sort of doing that first bit of work of putting it out in the open and seeing where it goes. Are there any questions? Is there any interest in kind of going down where this is right now, sort of formally in a meeting? Or do we want to give folks the chance to read this sort of asynchronously?
I personally haven't had the chance to go through this yet. I will definitely take a read. If we want to discuss the high level overview though, of like what is the current status, I think that could be useful.
Yeah, great. I mean, so for folks who don't, I see Zane and Simao, sorry if I butchered your names, are here who, as far as I can tell, are using the Azure Managed Cluster solution. So this is definitely relevant to you folks. And so you know the background, but just for the purposes of the recording, I will explain the background. which hopefully is sort of concisely explained in this document. There is no cluster API. There's no formal cluster API specification for how to do managed Kubernetes in cluster API. So providers implementing this in the past 2 years or so have sort of had to bootstrap their own set of resource specifications that fits within the existing cluster API spec. So really the long story short is that due to that sort of freedom to do this in any way possible, CAPZ made the decision to do this under an experimental API tag. And so that has not, the project has evolved sort of organically in the last couple of years. And we've maintained that experimental API specification as a way of giving ourselves the flexibility to adapt and respond to how folks are using it in the real world. So I think that it's the opinion of, I think, most folks who have been paying attention to this recently, that we have sort of received enough actual adoption. We're kind of at a terminal velocity for folks actually using this in the real world. And Zane, feel free to chime in if you have any of your own opinions. And so the value of hardening this API down to a sort of stable contract has, I think, overtaken the value of flexibility in the future. So for folks who are actually building platforms and building businesses on top of Azure Managed Cluster, I think the value of flexibility is less than like the value of like, hey, can I actually trust this API, or am I gonna have to go refactor all my operational platforms, continually until this graduates. So I think we want to graduate this as soon as possible to give folks that confidence that they can reliably build platforms on top of a stable contract. So that's the sort of background. It's been experimental, and we're trying to make sort of the minimum amount of practical changes to get this to V1. So I would anticipate there'll be some breakage, but we want to work within the community to determine what the appropriate sort of pain is. Cecile?
Yeah, I do have one question. I think all of us in here know what we're talking about, but it might be worth clarifying to external or like people who aren't as familiar with the implementation, what we mean by V1. Because CAPZ itself, the version is already V1, so AKS is part of that. And really what we're talking about here is removing the feature flag and not marking the API as experimental anymore, so that it can't have breaking changes and it won't be removed without notice. But really the API version and the CAPZ version are not related to that, right? So.
Right, so I don't know, maybe you could do a better job of explaining that there's a subtle distinction between the CAPZ API, or the CAPZ sort of, if you want to call it product, and this particular subset of what's available in V1 CAPZ. So as you say, CAPZ overall is already V1, so we can rely on that contract being integral. But for me, I think of this in like purely practical terms. When I'm defining an Azure Managed Cluster resource and defining all of its references and how you might compose an entire cluster template together, the Azure Managed Cluster resource type is subject to change. So as the community evolves and as we, one thing, this is a slight digression, but one thing that we are currently evaluating is how to integrate the cluster API proposal that recommends how to do managed Kubernetes and cluster API for providers, how to integrate those recommendations into our Azure Managed Cluster implementation. And that may, I think to the folks who've read that proposal, there are some, I think, definite opportunities for breaking changes. So it'll be up to us as a community, really as a larger community, CAPZ, and working with Cluster API to determine if it makes sense for us to integrate those breaking changes into Azure Managed Cluster, which we can do now because we haven't sort of tagged these particular API specs. So Azure Managed Cluster Azure Managed Machine Pool, those kinds of things as V1. Did that clarify? I honestly don't feel like I can be the best person to represent the distinction between CapZ V1 and Azure Managed Cluster Experimental. Go ahead, Zane.
Yeah, I think like I just wanted to add, like there's like, for me it's two things. Like the V1 is the contract, like like the user interface that we are going to support, and we're going to provide an experience to running AKS on top of that. But from the past few months, like I've been working with like AKS itself, like not speaking out of the CapC, it's also an evolving product, I would say. It has been adding features. I would say like it's or dropping some features in that sense. And I would say CapC is the only operator, I think, like out there who is managing AKS, because from the issues that have been discovered or uncovered through CapC, I believe like AKS is not managed through any operator right now, or in a wide like spread usage. So there are like few things that probably we need to on the back end to learn from the AKS behaving, right? So AKS, like let's say like is very error prone to like when some operation is happening in the agent pool, it won't allow any operations on the cluster level, or these kind of things that you would not expect in any Kubernetes generic Kubernetes cluster to happen. But AKS has these kind of issues. CapC, being its like opinionated implementation, I think should adopt to those also. So those are like the second thing I'm saying is the backend, like in the implementation, how we are running it through that. Because when it becomes V1, for me, like it's not only the contract, but it's also the stability, right? Like now you can go ahead and run your production clusters on top of that. Yeah, go ahead, Sis.
Yeah, I think I agree with Zane about like the reliability and aspect of it, of like now, we recommend this for production, whereas right now it's kind of like use at your own risk. Not the AKS product, but like the CapZ integration. And I think, however, we want to be careful with not trying to solve everything to remove the experimental label, because I think like, for example, if we try to do like anything like feature completion, that will get very like it will become a slippery slope. Like I think every software is always evolving and we're never done. And so I don't think we should try to be done. I think we should just try to be in a state where we feel comfortable that we're going to be maintaining this long term. We're not going to want to remove it, and it's stable enough for people to use in production. But I think the feature matrix will keep expanding after we remove experimental label. One thing that I wanted to point out is maybe we should also think about how machine pool experimental status comes into play here, because even if we remove the Azure Managed Cluster experimental feature, it will still require the machine pool feature flag until machine pool is not experimental. And so I don't know if we want to consider that a dependency or two independent work streams, but there's something there.
Yeah, I'm going to take a note of that. So we want to add that to the PR for sure. I don't think it's an easy, so that really is a cluster API dependency that we have. So that's as far as I can tell, CapZ would be happy to graduate machine pool to V1, but we can't have an Azure machine pool that's V1 with a cluster API machine pool that's experimental. That won't really work. So yeah, I'm going to take a note of that.
Any other questions about this or comments or concerns? All right, if not, I would encourage everyone to read through this proposal and add your comments, and I guess we can continue the review process async and revisit maybe next week or in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, let's use the community consensus process to come to an agreement as far as priority and when we want to land this. But just FYI, we'll be probably pushing to do this soon, like in the coming months, and not, we don't want this to take like a year and a half.
Thanks for driving this, Jack. All right, I guess you don't get a break. You have the second item too, so go for it.
Okay, It's a pretty simple one. So yeah, I wanted to propose the, I wanted to just actually to poll the audience for how we feel about patch releases. Right now, my understanding is that we release patch releases kind of ad hoc when we feel like we have a complete set of fixes that make sense. You know, there's a little bit of overhead of cutting a release, and that works fine. I wonder if it would work better if we did patch releases on a regular cadence, like say weekly, and then use our office hours as a sort of go, no go gating discussion to see, do we want to release this week? I know it's not ideal because office hours is on Thursday, and that means we would be releasing toward the end of the week. But also, I don't think that we're in the position where our releases are sort of pushing to live environments. So even if we happen to release on a Friday, you know, folks who have had experience will opt to consume that release, say on a Monday or Tuesday, so they can have that full business week to validate. But do we have any opinions about instead of, you know, opening up a random Slack thread and say, hey, should we cut a patch release? Instead, just document in our release process that we release patch releases are regular, like say every Friday. And during office hours, we discuss whether or not we have the sufficient number of content to cut a release that week. Any opinions? Cecile, saying it's got a thumbs up.
I would love to define this as part of, and I don't have the issue link right now, but we have an issue right now in the milestone to define release cadence. And it's unfortunate Matt isn't here right now, but let's see, he was going to draft this. And I think we were aiming to do this mostly for minor releases, but I don't see why we couldn't also include a bullet point about patch releases. In general, I like the idea of having a release check-in at office hours, although it's less inclusive because not everyone can make it to office hours. So I find that using Slack async is a little more inclusive. We could have maybe like a Slack reminder every week that like the bot posts a message and says, hey, do we want to release this week? And then we kind of use that to remind ourselves we should check whether a patch release is warranted. I also agree that we should do it kind of on a per need basis. We don't need to release every week if there's nothing to release that week, but it's good to at least have that weekly reminder of we should check if a release is needed. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two main takeaways are from the two main sort of differences between the way we do it now. One is to set a day so the community can just have their expectations that like every whatever, if it's every week, then it's every day, or if it's every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they just know that there's a regular day where they can check in and evaluate the set of changes that have been released in order to build their own processes around potentially consuming those releases with regularity, you know, in their operations. And then I have, this is maybe my own intuition, which is very subjective, but I would like to make the practice of regular releases not like controversial thing, and not an indication that the project is unstable, or, you know, I think in the past we've done patch releases very irregularly. There are lots of minor releases that don't even get a patch release, and so there's a potential there's some potential signaling going on where you start releasing patch releases like, oh, is this minor release unstable? Maybe I should wait till the next minor release because I'm not used to having patch releases. So I would like to change that culture where patch releases are just a normal part of the process of managing the project. And also, I think that this will be a forcing function for us as project maintainers to get better at prioritizing what lands onto main. So we'll realize if there's a helpful fix, that we can prioritize that and get that into the next patch release. Go ahead,
Simone?
Simone.
So yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think that would be very helpful. Two notes though. One, it's the releases on Friday. And so if we release on Friday, what happens if we need a critical fix or to fix something in production? Or do we have an escape hatch to cut a release earlier if it's required? Otherwise, you know, I don't want to release something on a Friday, but if it's broken, wait for the other Friday to get something. So just like, you know, brainstorming ideas here.
For the Friday thing, I think that was mostly a constraint of wanting to do it with office hours. But if we do go the async Slack route, we could have that reminder be any day of the week. And we could even do it Monday and aim to release on Tuesdays. It doesn't have to be Friday. I agree that Friday is not ideal, even for maintainers, like work-life balance. It's not great to be doing releases Fridays.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I'm all for regular patch releases as long as everybody agrees that in an emergency we can cut a release earlier. So
Yeah, that's the thing I heard that's the most important. So
yeah,
I think that there is, yes. So long as to me, the key concept here is keeping to the regular release schedule as a way of preventing releases from getting indefinitely pushed back. Because with that regular release schedule, it's like no matter what, we're going to release on Monday or whatever it might be. And I think that's helpful to making sure that like the outcome is we want regular releases. We want to get patches into customers' hands if they want them. And so having a regular release schedule, in my experience, is the best way to do that, as opposed to having every release be subject to some sort of subjective triage prioritization. That can just get hairy. So as long as you have the regular release process, I would also be totally fine with documenting in the release cadence some sort of escape hatch situation where folks the community can vote on, hey, let's do a Wednesday release, even though we just did one on Monday, because this fix that landed yesterday, which has sufficient test coverage, is super important. We don't want to wait 5 days. So I think we can discuss that in the document so you'll link to an issue that we're tracking. So that will eventually yield documentation updates to our existing release process. So we should make sure we can account for that. Cool.
What do you think about I guess we can decide in the issue too, but with the idea of discussing on Slack as opposed to office hours?
I think that's great. Yeah.
Okay, great. What are I guess, what are the next steps for this? Should we bring this to the issue? Yeah,
I think the next steps are to sort of land the set of definitions that we want. Like, how often is it? Weekly? Is it bi-weekly? Which day of the week? I mean, I think that there is some, we haven't really talked about release validation. We can definitely improve the way we test releases and gate releases. But maybe that's like an orthogonal work stream that, like, we don't want to block. I don't want to block the regular release of patch releases on that, but I do want to continually improve that so that we can get more and more confident that when we do release, it's going to be stable. Because right now, I think we pass a little bit of that on to the customers. I would imagine folks here who are using CAPC are staging, when you consume a new patch release, you stage that in some way and verify that it works in your environment. So we can take some of that burden away over time by doing that more sort of generally within our project. Did that answer your question, Cecile?
Sort of. Yeah, so I guess, do you want to set up a reminder on Slack, or is this jumping the gun? Should we be first
Well, let's get it.
discussing on the
I would say let's get it
process
into the
issue.
doc first and get that landed.
Okay. Could I ask you to follow up with Matt to see if we can get that integrated?
Definitely.
Okay, cool. I guess speaking of releases, do we want to talk about doing a patch release this week or early next week? I think we have a lot of fixes in 1.4 for especially for managed clusters.
Yeah, I spent most of my time yesterday in terms of CAPC project maintenance, getting those cherry picks landed into 1.4, and so those are all there now. So I think we're actually at sufficient. We've got the sufficient number of changes to do a release. So I would be totally in favor of doing that today, tomorrow, Monday.
Zane?
Go ahead, Zane.
Yeah, so I just wanted to raise, not in this meeting, but like we introduced some bugs also in the CAPC managed clusters. I was just trying to create a like issue around that. So it's not a CAPC bug, it's just like the AKS API issue. It accepts the labels. We just introduced a landed a div, landed a PR where it can change the labels, right? And we can node labels can be changed, but that means like we remove the system labels from AKS, and AKS allows us to do that. And that means like if there's any kind of system labels that are being added by AKS, they will be removed. The good thing is like it allows us to add it back also. So there's no gatekeeping on the side of AKS, but this is something probably just want to discuss in the open issue. I will how we deal with that, like like kubernetes.azure.com labels, beat labels, that applies for the taints also actually PR. Do we skip them, or merge them to our before sending, because skipping is not enough somehow. Yeah, go ahead.
Do folks mind if we dig into this a little bit? We've got some time. I would love to just
a
talk.
question
Go ahead,
before
Seal.
we dig in. So are you saying that this is a regression that is currently being introduced in the current release branch that we should block releasing on? Just wanting to make sure I understand.
We did not allow to change labels before.
I think the answer to that is maybe. That's I would think the discussion would tell us the answer to that question, because that is
okay. So we're saying
question.
this is potentially breaking this is potentially blocking the release, is what we're saying.
If some customer is using some system labels, we might be removing them once they upgrade to the new CAPC.
Okay, yeah, so we should definitely dig in further before we do any releasing. Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
So I mean, we could also just undo I think the key point is that the current state of things, you can't update labels, and that arguably is safer. So we can just remove that cherry pick from 1.4 manually somehow, so not ship that change. Well, let's talk about that a little bit, Zane. So it sounds like maybe what you're saying is that when I, as a CAPZ user, when I submit a set of additive labels to change, does that then become does AKS interpret that as the complete set of labels? And so any labels that it currently has that aren't in that set, it just deletes?
Yes.
Okay. So, okay, got it. Cecile, go ahead. I'm thinking. Crying tears inside.
I'm +1 on your suggestion to revert the PR that made labels mutable until we can think and reintroduce it in a way that's not having undesirable side effects. I think there are a lot of really important fixes in that branch that we want to get out to users. And so if we can find a quick way to unblock ourselves and release in the meantime, that'd be great.
Cool.
Zane?
Yeah.
So actually, like on the other side, like I have been testing a solution like in our development staging. So just ignoring kubernetes.azure.com labels and not allowing users to like remove them, because we are doing a very easy comparisons, like that is existing profile versus the current profile that we want. If the existing profile has anything that has kubernetes.azure.com, we just send it again. And that has been like at least helped us to work with confidence in at least our staging environment right now.
I think if we have a solution and we can time box it and say like we are able to merge it by end of day, for example, that's great. But I still, think we should have the revert option as a backup, and not rush into anything. Like I think reverting is safer if we're not able to get to a solution that we're all good with to merge quickly, and then we can re-add the patch and the fix together. Go ahead, Zane.
Yeah, I think the revert is the best option because we do have to probably make it like a feature set. The taints and labels will become mutable in one feature in AKS, and maybe we should enable them in one PR at the same time, and knowing all the side effects that we are currently discovering.
Can I ask a question about it? Do we need to consume the set of system applied labels and maybe taints as well during cluster creation so that the CAPC representation of Azure Managed Cluster has, or Azure Managed Machine Pool has, those system labels? Well, go ahead, Zane.
No, we don't need, because we were supporting labels actually on the creation time always. And somehow when the cluster is created, the AKS reconciler comes in later and they add those labels, right? For everyone somehow, I don't know how this works under the hood. And we had those system labels always, even if in the creation time we are specifying 2 or 3 labels from the user provided labels, right? So that request would go in and the system labels will work. I think that we probably need some comment from AKS on how it internally works to really understand why on creation it doesn't destroy, but on updates it does.
Yeah, that sounds like an AKS bug, to be honest. Go ahead, Cecile.
Okay, so in terms of practical next steps, Jack, are you able to open a revert PR on the 1.4 release branch for the mutable label PR?
Yes.
Cool. And then Zane, if you could open an issue that with the bug, and then maybe we can open an issue in the AKS repo as well that links to this issue to get AKS to weigh in on the API differences. And then feel free to open a PR with the fix that you have if it works out well. If not, we can follow up on that. Yeah, I think that should be good. And then after that, we can probably aim to release the patch release either tomorrow or Monday.
Yes, I think so.
I thought
Did we say we wanted to revert the taints as well?
That's a good question. Zane, do we want to revert the taints as well?
We did not land that, right? It's open.
It's not merged yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Our labels, was that cherry picked? Mutable labels?
Yes.
It was?
Yes.
Oh, did we consider that a bug fix? Okay. I think, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have cherry picked that. Yeah, we don't want to release on Fridays. Okay, that's a good point. So if we can't get it by end of day, let's do Monday then. Cool.
Great. I think we did consider the labels update a bug fix, by the way.
Yeah.
But I think there's a larger discussion about, I was talking with John about this, like when is it appropriate to implement something as create only? Because that, to me, that sort of smells just like a bug that we wouldn't support an update. That would not be obvious from a user perspective. But I suppose that's not true. Like we're literally running into various things in the AKS surface area that are not updatable. So we probably do want to have a nice clean pattern for that and call that sort of feature complete until we can work with AKS to make update possible. Go ahead, Zane.
Yeah, like I want to say like the labels were always mutable actually. Like that's just basically that was a bug when we added that feature to not to update that kind of saved us. And the other was like the taints and other are even more dangerous because we need some testing to be done there. What happens is like when right now we are not deleting any node pool through CAPC ever. Why? Because we are worried that the taints that are being added during the drain process might be removed also, like that are not added by us as a user provider, right? So anything like that is also like, it's even the surface area is even bigger for that to all the considerations or all the edge cases. So labels probably is an easy fix, but taints probably is gonna take much more time for us to get in a good shape or have enough confidence to land that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm going into detail, but I'm just super curious with the labels thing. I would imagine that the CLI that AKS CLI supports label updates. So maybe we're just using the wrong API call when we. So I can talk with AKS, or I don't know, Matt. Are you familiar enough with looking into the CLI code to be able to identify what API calls are actually being performed under the hood?
I mean, yeah, if you look at the CLI, basically everything ends at some point with a call to the Python SDK. And then those map pretty directly to because those are generated from the same. So those will make sense in terms of the Go SDK.
Yeah, so maybe I'll smoke test that today, Zane. I'll just I'll have a cluster and then I'll use the CLI to update the labels. I'll wait until so it's I assume it's fairly easy. You wait at some point until the kubernetes.azure.com labels are part of the nodes, and once I see that, then I'll update the labels with. So whether it's additive or deletive, like the system nodes get deleted no matter what. Any update in CAPC deletes labels right now. Is that right?
Yeah, so just wanted to add, like, it's not that easy to reproduce because AKS is not adding the system labels or anything like that, like in normal conditions, right? So what I experimented was like another experimental feature that is the spot instances, right? So for spot instances, AKS do mark those as like labels and taints, right? And we just need to find out like what are any other case where when AKS would add the system labels or system taints, and then we can test that. So probably I should have clarified that because I don't know the all service. If we can reach to conclusion that CAPC use cases or features will never allow a system label, then pretty much it's safe. But I was not sure about that, like what are the all different combination of the features of CAPC, you know, like on some add-ons or some agent pool features that will add those or not. I'm not 100% on that.
All right, anything else on that topic or on the topic of the patch release? All right, if not, let's do any other general questions or questions for maintainers, comments? All right, let's do a quick milestone check. We are 2 weeks. Is it 2 weeks? 2 weeks approximately from our target release date. And the milestone is getting pretty small, so that's great. Anything that anyone wants to update on in here? is there anything else that isn't in here that should be in here, or anything that is in here that we think we're not gonna be able to get done in the next 2 weeks that we should get out of the milestone? Matt?
The first one, flat car, Mateusz got back to me, and it sounds like there's still a fighting chance that it's going to merge, but probably not. But I guess we'll leave it here.
Okay, sounds
The
good.
flat
Yeah, and
car
then
thing, that's the only update I have.
if it doesn't, we can move it.
And I'll jump on the second one, I promise, this time, this week or soon.
Awesome. Yeah, for this second one, we actually had a discussion. I think you weren't here yet, but
Yeah, I
at the
see
beginning
that,
of
yeah.
office hours, I'll let Jack catch you up on that, but we're talking about including a cadence for patch releases in there. Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Jonathan about the async agent pools. So that's a fairly significant change. I would say we might not want to do that with only like a week to go.
So I saw the PR I was blocked on got merged, so I can rebase that fairly quickly.
Do
Do we
you
wanna-
agree? Do you agree that it's a significant change, or would you push back on that?
I mean, it's a pretty big refactor, but besides rebasing, it is done.
Okay, cool. Maybe we can let's give ourselves a chance, maybe by end of day tomorrow, to see if we want to review that.
Okay,
So
yeah,
agent pools, unfortunately, is poorly named. That's the AKS node pools service. So that's why I'm I want to get some good testing mileage on that before we release that.
okay.
Go ahead, Cecile.
Yeah, for what it's, go ahead, Jonathan.
I was gonna say, yeah, it shouldn't be a breaking change, but
Definitely not. No, it's all good.
good.
It's just I just would want some testing mileage to make sure we didn't revert anything. Go ahead, Cecile.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, for what it's worth, I did review that for like the last few weeks, and I think it's really close to merging. It was basically ready. I just asked Jonathan to hold on because we wanted to fix the autoscaler bug for AKS, and that refactor was gonna make that bug fix harder to merge because of merge conflicts. But now that has merged, I think if we're able to merge it like in the next 2 days, I think that gives us enough time before the release to get some test mileage on it.
How big was the PR that I'll be rebasing off of? Was it a big change or? Okay.
It wasn't
a
actually, no.
big change. It just happens to be exactly in the area that you're moving to a different file. So we'll have to reapply those changes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I worked a little bit on that. I collaborated, so hit me up if you look at the rebase conflict and you're like, what is going on here? And I can help out.
Okay, cool.
Cool. So let's put a time box on this. Like if we're not able to merge it, let's say by Monday end of day, then let's hold off on it until the release, and then, but I think it should be doable. I think this one is not going to make it. There's a PR, but there are lots of comments on it, and I don't think it's been active for a bit. So I'm not confident that we'll be able to get that merged. What else? I actually want to talk about the last one. I kind of want to propose deferring that to the next release, just for risk. Kind of the same idea as the agent pools, except this is worse. This is a really big change, and I'm just afraid of the side effects that we're going to find out. And I wouldn't want that to merge like right before the release. And it's closed, but it hasn't been reviewed yet. So the review cycle is probably going to take a while. And I don't want that to merge like 2 days before the release or something like that, especially since I'll be out during the release and won't be around to help out if something goes wrong. Thoughts, Jack?
Can I ask you to, because I'm super curious, is it in a good place right now? Did you figure everything out?
It's in a place where I'm waiting for reviews, and there's one thing that I haven't figured out yet. There's that I haven't had time to look at, which is there's a bug basically in the Linux kernel that causes a feature in Calico when using VXLAN to not work. And we have in the past gone around by disabling that feature. with the check feature detect override, but it's a bit harder to do. You can't do that override directly in the Helm chart. So basically my only choices would be to add like a manual patch afterwards on the Felix configuration, but I don't want to do that because then that introduces an additional step for users.
Cool. Well, anyway, thank you for doing this. For folks who don't know, Cecile took this over from my futile attempts to do the same thing. It's a very hard slog. This is classic chop wood, carry water type work. So great job.
The first, I think the first 90% took like an hour, and then the last 10% has taken me like 4 weeks. So it's just like getting the last mile that's really hard. But yeah, your first attempt helped me a lot, Jack. So yeah, definitely going to give you credit on the commit.
It's the 80-20 rule.
Sorry?
It's the 80-20 rule.
Yeah, exactly. So should I move this? I think I'll move this to next for now, and then I will make sure it doesn't merge in the next 2 weeks. I
Yeah,
don't
and
think it's going.
to be clear to folks, this isn't really a part of CapZ, but it would, if we merge something like this, that sort of added testing friction, it would materially make it harder for us to validate the health of 1.5. So I think it's a good idea to move a change like that to the beginning of a release cycle.
Yeah, exactly. Just being cautious and don't want to break everything right before releasing. Cool. I think this one is in a good place. It just needs review. So that one we can leave in here. All right. Anything else that anyone wants to add in here that we should be tracking that's not in here? All right. Any last words, any last minute question, anything else? How do people feel about the new time? Is good, bad? I feel pretty good about it. I've had time to have my coffee before this, unlike other times. But let's do it for a few weeks and see how it works out for everyone. All right. Thanks all. Have a good rest of your Thursday.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.
See you on Slack.
Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.